Good morning, everyone. It is Friday, May 8th. And in our devotion for today, I want to continue with our series about true self versus false self. And I want to begin with the same book recommendation I had yesterday, just for those who didn't catch it. There is a book called The Deeper Journey, The Spirituality of Discovering Your True Self. And it's by M. Robert Mulholland. This is a great book about just getting right and going deeper in your relationship with God, about finding a deeper, intimate, more profound, life-changing experiences. It's a great book that leads you on a journey, a spiritual journey that helps to get rid of the false part of who you are and embrace the new life that Christ won for you. I highly, highly recommend this book, especially for those of you who have a lot of extra time on your hands right now. But one of the big key themes about this book is the spiritual journey is a journey of throwing off the false self, which has entrenched itself into our lives, and embracing the true self, which is what Jesus offers us in the new life he won for us. I'm going to do a reading in the devotion. This is from the beginning of chapter 3. A friend of mine once said, as he began the second of 2 lecture series, the first step is the hardest. Then it gets more difficult. The same could be said about dealing with our false self. The reality of this pervasive, deeply entrenched, self-referenced structure of being is that the primary context of our spiritual journey is one of the hardest things for us to acknowledge. We tend to think of it as a surface phenomena that can be treated by a few cosmetic alterations in our behavior. We are so slow to accept the fact that our false self is who we are all the way to the very core of our being. We are profoundly habituated to a self-centered way of being in this world. Jesus makes this unmistakably clear when he says, if anyone would come after me, they must deny themselves. And whoever loses their self for my sake will find it. Jesus is not talking about giving up candy for Lent. He is calling for the abandonment of our entire pervasive, deeply entrenched matrix of self-referenced being. It's even more difficult, however, for us to acknowledge the reality of our religious false self. Our religious false self presumes, because we are religious, that everything is fine in our relationship with God. Oh, to be sure, there may be a need for some fine-tuning of a few aspects of our life, a polishing up of a few of our rough edges. Our religious false self may be rigorous in its religiosity, devoted in discipleship, and sacrificial in service, without being in a loving union with God. We see a frightening example of this at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus depicts a scene before the throne on the judgment day. A group of people appear there and say, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many deeds of power in your name? Obviously, these were seriously dedicated disciples. Their lives had been spent doing God things. But Jesus replies to them, I never knew you. Go away from me. You are evildoers. Matthew chapter 7, verses 22 to 23. You see, their lives, their ministries were not grounded in a loving union with Christ. They were religious false selves. They were so busy being in the world for God that they failed to be in God for the world. Let me repeat that. They were so busy being in the world for God that they failed to be in God for the world. There's a great difference between these two ways. A religious false self will expend amazing amounts of energy and resources to be in the world for God. But, you see, we are called to be in God for the world. And this is costly. It requires the abandonment of the whole self-referenced structure of our false self, and especially the religious false self. Oswald Chambers said it well. Salvation is not just deliverance from sin. Now, it's not just the experience of personal holiness. The salvation of God is deliverance out of ourself entirely into union with God's self. You know, the heart of this is that when we understand that phrase, we are not to be in the world for God, we're to be in God for the world. We do the most good for this world when we are willing to give up our false selves to be in a profoundly changing union or relationship with God that gets rid of our self-referenced, self-centered, deeply entrenched way of thinking about us as the central part of the story of our lives. And instead, we embrace this life of union with God. It changes us and it transforms us. And by being in union, in relationship with God, a deeply, profoundly intimate relationship with God that is transformative, by being in that relationship with God, we change the world. Because God uses us. It's God's holiness wraps itself around us. We become holy, and by becoming holy, we automatically change everything around us. It's a lot different than just going into the world and doing some kind acts and thinking, that's the extent of my spirituality. I'm doing good deeds. That means I'm a spiritual person. It doesn't. A spiritual person is one who throws off the false self and embraces the true self. One who's not in the world for God's purposes, but instead is in a union with God for the sake of the world. Amen. There's lots of deep thoughts here. It is called The Deeper Journey, and so it's a heavy read, but it's a profoundly worldview-changing book that helps us understand the significance and the journey of what it means to really embrace our true selves. This weekend, we're going to have worship. We have a couple events happening this week. Tomorrow is Saturday morning from 9 to 11. We are doing our drive to pick up some supplies and much needed items for 3 important organizations: Carpenter's Place, Mosaic, and a local food pantry. We sent out an email. It's up on our Facebook page. You can see the list of things to get people. But 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock tomorrow is when we're doing it. All you do is you drive up, you stay in your car. There'll be people there. Drive up to the school entrance on the southeast side of our building. You want to drive up to that entrance. There'll be people there in masks and gloves. They'll actually take the items out of your car for you. And it's a way of us, even in the midst of this pandemic, thinking about those who are vulnerable and need more assistance. So that's tomorrow from 9 to 11 a.m. And then on Sunday at 9 o'clock, we have a very special worship service. It's Mother's Day. Don't forget about that. As well as we are celebrating Holy Communion. So before the service, please remember to grab some bread, some crackers, some water, some juice, some wine, whatever you have on hand, because that's what Jesus did. Whatever you happen to have in your house is fine, and just grab that beforehand so that we can celebrate Holy Communion together on Mother's Day. In the meantime, take care of yourself and look in on those who are most vulnerable. See you tomorrow.